What's up, Degenerate Nation? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is the ACC betting preview. I'm Stuckey, and joining me, as always, my co-host, Collin Wilson. Have a very special guest today. Bud Elliott is going to talk some ACC, share his thoughts right off the top before we get to him. Collin, excited to talk some ACC. I see you got a new NC State helmet behind you. Hopefully you don't have to take that down after a trip to Greenville in week one.
You got to stop this ECU thing that's going to happen here in week one with me. You're giving me the sweats already, and we're not even here. I have to say, I'm looking forward to this podcast because generally we get to 14 teams in the ACC. 6 to 8 of them we just kind of throw away. We don't want to really do that much deep dive research on Duke, Cuse, some of these teams at the bottom. But I had a really great time at ACC Media Days. They make it feel more like a party atmosphere. I think they take care of everybody that's there. But the SEC just feels mechanical. The Big 12 is in the big, open, empty Cowboy Stadium in AT&T. But once you get to ACC, it's very close in proximity, and that allows you to get up in DJ Uiagalelei's face. That allows you to get up in Dave Doran's face and ask them the questions that you want. The access to players and coaches was better at ACC than it was any other media day. So I'm excited to have Bud here. I'm excited I have a new NC State helmet behind me, and there is no loss coming against East Carolina. Stuck.
Well, I'm telling you, NC State fans are nervous about that game. Weird things can happen in Greenville in that rivalry, but we'll get to NC State. And before we bring in Bud, just to kind of give a picture of the ACC landscape. You mentioned access to coaches. There's a lot of coaching changes, right? There's 4 new head coaches in the ACC, and the coordinator changes are just insane. There's 14 teams, 11 new offensive coordinators, if you count a co-OC in one situation, 8 new defensive coordinators, and depending on if you think some quarterback battles are actually battles, not up to 5 quarterback battles. And speaking of quarterbacks, you mentioned NC State, by the way, only team in the entire conference to retain their entire staff, and mentioned quarterback battles. This is a quarterback-rich league. If you look at some projections for, NFL draft 2023 quarterbacks, you could argue 7 of the top 20 are in the ACC. So there's a lot of quarterback talent in the conference, but let's talk about some of that and bring in Mr. Bud Elliott. You know him from the Cover 3 podcast and probably from Twitter and other endeavors. What's going on, Bud?
What's going on, guys? Glad to be back. We had NC State hard last year on this show. That was good.
So, but how you just got back from Las Vegas? Was he hammering NC State numbers? They've been hammered for 6 months. Was he finding value out there on anything?
Not on NC State. I did get quite a few tickets on Arkansas State under 5.5 minus 50 from a MGM kiosk. So, that was good.
Kiosk bets are always sweet when you find
no players card on the kiosk, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, that was good. Rutgers under 4.5 at the Golden Nugget. I thought it was a little off market, so a little bit of that. Played some UNLV against Nevada. So just in the look ahead stuff there at the Westgate. Jumped on the bandwagon with Colin for Donovan Edwards at 300-1 for the Heisman. Had a little piece of that. It was a good trip.
They didn't even flinch when at the Westgate. They even flinched when you rolled back the rubber band and threw a honey down. So
yeah. You roll back the rubber band at 300-1. You're like, I'll take one page.
Yeah.
I'll take rubber band, please.
Yeah, you know, by the way, Nevada is getting I just bet Texas State, found a cheaper 7 out there. My first bet of the year was New Mexico State. I mean, Nevada's getting hit a lot against out there. They might be dreadful, but I'm going to get your thoughts on some of these things that I just mentioned off the top. Let's start with the quarterback battles. You could say there's, up to 5 if you think Slovis is in a battle. I think North Carolina is the one that's maybe the most interesting. And in addition to Clemson, if you think DJ's at risk of losing his job, like Trevor Lawrence style with the flashy 5-star freshman, which one are you either most excited about, or do you think is going to have the biggest impact, that really matters in who ends up winning it for their team?
From a gambling standpoint, I do think it's North Carolina because of the different styles of quarterback at play, right? Yeah. So, Drake May is a guy who was committed to Alabama, big time arm. Jacoby Criswell is a guy who is, kind of a mix. He can throw it, but he can also run it a little more. I don't think they would run it quite as much with Drake May. So that one for the Tar Heels is one I'm going to be monitoring pretty closely in terms of, for tempo, for does the clock run or not? for totals. Like that's probably the most impactful one on a game-to-game betting standpoint, I would say.
Is there a true freshman? Isn't there a true freshman involved in that too, potentially?
Connor Harrell?
Yeah.
There is. I think Criswell came out. I'm sorry, Josh Downs came out yesterday after practice and said that Criswell is the one that he had the most chemistry with so far. So definitely, if you're out there betting quarterbacks, who's going to start game one, just keep an eye on camp there for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, especially because I think Carolina, from just an improvement perspective, could arguably have the most improved defense. I mean, they can't go anywhere else but up. But then if they're also playing slower, could be a really good under team early on in the season. Talked about a lot of the coaching changes, right? 4 new head coaches. And then just, it feels like every single team has a new offensive coordinator in the ACC. And then there's a handful of new defensive coordinators as well. I'll let you go wherever you want to go with this: offensive, defensive coordinator, or head coach. Which one do you think has either the biggest positive impact, or do you think is just a complete disaster of a move this upcoming season?
The one I'm really curious about, and I'm not super high on this team, is what Syracuse is doing, right? Because you go from running that sort of Baylor-esque system that they were running, which Dino got the job with, to be honest, to running what UVA was running last year. They basically took UVA's almost their entire offensive coaching staff. They're going to throw the ball around, I assume, more than they did last year, although they're still going to run it. I mean, you have Sean Tucker there, who's a really good player. Is Garrett Schrader actually good at throwing the ball? Like, his numbers so far suggest he's not. Protection's been an issue. Receivers there have been a bit of an issue. They're calling it more pro style. I'm not really convinced this is going to work. It could work. I did play these guys under 5.5 minus 90 when it came out. I thought that was that's pretty heavy juice, but I did feel like laying that was value on my sheet at least.
Yeah, I don't think it was a stylistic fit, just what the Schrader can do and what they were just like a shotgun and run it with either one of those last year. I think Syracuse just had a quarterback who's probably going to be more depth of thrown. It got hurt. He's out for the year now. I don't know if he was eventually going to get the job. Feels like a desperation move from Babers, and I just don't see the fit with Schrader, but I completely agree with you. Colin, what were you going to say?
Well, Robert Anae, the offensive coordinator, is coming in there, so we'll see what he's going to do. I think what I want to ask Bud is, we've lost both coordinators at Clemson. Dabo acts like, promoting from within, there's just not going to be a beat miss. We're keeping the same scheme. We're keeping the same personnel grouping. Everybody's going to know the verbiage that we're using on the field. My problem is you can't replicate Brent Venables. It's impossible between the relationship that he had with his linebackers and Skowski or whoever was taking in the plays, that half second that it takes to get in there and say, this is what the offense is doing and where they're going. And I'm supposed to all of a sudden believe that Wes Goodwin can do that. I know he's the right-hand man, but do you expect any bumps with Clemson's offense and defense, considering it coming from within?
So I didn't really love the internal promotion on offense, I feel like, because they weren't very good last year. Now, I know they had a lot of problems. Receivers were all sort of the same body type. They all just looked the exact same build, not a lot of diversity of bodies in that room, which you kind of need to have a functional receiver unit. It's cool in Madden to have everybody be 6'5", and it's kind of important to have some slots and some X's and some Y's in actual football. They didn't really have that last year. I know they had some offensive line issues up front, but I didn't love that promotion just because I felt like maybe some new voices in the room could do a bit of good for the Tigers. I have heard they're running more tempo this year, though. So now everybody says we're going to try to go faster, more intense, blah, blah, blah. But if they really do run more tempo, that's one to take note of. Defensively, though, I knew about Wes Goodwin for a while because I had a coach in that room tell me, this is the guy that Venables talks to in the room. Even more than some of the other defensive coaches, this is the guy he bounces stuff off. So, clearly this is the dude in that room, according to the guy I talked to, who Venables really trusted when it came to scheme and design of the defense. So maybe not as good with the sign stealing stuff, but if Venables respects this guy that much for the other coaches to take notice, I don't think Clemson's going to miss a beat defensively. And they also had a lot of injuries last year on that defensive line, and we're still pretty dominant. If they stay healthy, they have a chance to just basically wipe everybody.
To tack on to what Bud is saying, Clemson finished 50th in seconds per play last year, and Bud and I were both standing around Dabo, and I asked, did you want to run more up-tempo last year? Are you planning on going back to up-tempo? And Dabo's exact response was, we were good enough to run tempo. We had to do things to win games. So, depending on how that offense is going to dictate how many points Clemson is going to score. So if you see efficiency and success rate and chains moving and scores getting up on the board, they're going to go faster. They'll finish higher than 25.3 seconds per play.
Well, but as regards to totals, look, the defensive line has a chance to be historically great. So who's scoring on them? And in order to put up points, I don't care how fast you go. If your quarterback play looks like it did last year, which brings me to my next question. Do you have a hot take on DJ? And do you think, like, if it ends up being, Klubnik that gets the job, are you going to say, wow, okay, I am way more in than Clemson because of the ceiling? Are you just in wait and see mode? Because didn't look great in spring. There's reports about his weight is in better shape. And then what we saw last year compared to his pedigree with a new offensive coordinator, I'm having trouble just kind of gauging where I rate him going into this year. Do you have any thoughts on that quarterback battle and or just DJ in general?
Yeah, so I do have a couple thoughts. Number one, I don't think that the people who think DJ is really talented are wrong. I mean, I've seen this kid play as a recruit. He has some really special physical tools, and he was really good as a freshman. He struggled a lot last year. I think there was a lot put on his plate, and you can maybe take that metaphorically as well. But he's skinnier now. Like Collin was standing there. If you guys saw him last year, and as somebody who's seen him throughout his career, really since he was a sophomore in high school, he's definitely slimmed back down some. So maybe he'll move better in the pocket. Streeter was the quarterback coach, so him being promoted to the offensive coordinator, maybe there's some more chemistry there. They call plays that DJ likes a little bit better. But K. Klubnik is legit as well. Like very, very highly rated kid for a reason. Balled out in the Texas State playoffs. I have more confidence in Clemson's quarterback room improving this year, just because either DJ will get back to some sort of acceptable level, or they'll play the freshman.
Yeah, well, can't get much worse. All right, I'll give you some leeway here to go wherever you want with it. Favorite, if you have a favorite win total over, and or under, or you can spin it with like the team that you think will be overvalued early in the season or undervalued. So kind of just like a buying and selling ACC overview. Where you want to go with this?
Sure. So is Louisville still 5.5, or we mostly 6s there? I kind of like that either way. I think Louisville will have the best offense that they've had under Scott Satterfield. You get Malik Cunningham back. You get a pretty nice offensive line back. They do lose Tyler Harrell, the transfer receiver to Alabama, but that's not really a drop back offense anyway. It's more of a play action type system, and I feel like they're fairly good at scheming guys open. Defensively, one position they needed to address for a long time was the nose guard spot. Louisville would give up a lot of movement if you watch them at the point of attack from that zero tech, and this year they went and they got Jermaine Lole. I think that's how you pronounce the kid's name. I know they're excited about it. I know Florida was trying to get him, and Florida was annoyed they could not get him. That could be a big time help. Now, he didn't really play much last year, only 250 snaps at Arizona State before getting hurt. But if he's back and healthy, I think that team, could win 8 games, right? And their over-under is like 6. Now, I already played them at Syracuse and laid 2. So I kind of like just laying the number at Syracuse better than I do, playing Louisville's win total over. But either are a fine bet, in my opinion. Just if they lose that Syracuse game, they're probably not going to go over the win total, right?
That's my only beef with it too. I mean, their schedule is vicious. I mean, they only have 2 pretty much given wins on the whole schedule. I have them favored in 6 games by under a touchdown. There'll be a dog at Clemson, and they have 3 true coin flips. And they're only 3-point favorites at Syracuse. And then the last 2 games of the year, it's like NC State at home, coin flip, at Kentucky, coin flip. So it's like the first and last games. Are you tying up your money? I agree. I project them at like 7-4, but there's so many coin flips on his schedule that is just completely unrelenting. But they won 6 games last year, went 0-4 in 1 possession games. I think that they're trending up, but maybe they're just better to bet in the first and last game and then on a game-to-game basis during the year. But if I was going to pick a side on Louisville, certainly would go over from a numbers perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that too. But when you come, Malik Cunningham is so important to that offense that without him, they lose their biggest weapon through the air, on the ground. And I think, I want to play the win total over too. I've held myself back this preseason because if something happens to him, all bets are off. So playing in a single game scenario where they're in one of these coin flips, they would absolutely have to get over the win total. And knowing that week when you bet it, that Malik Cunningham is healthy, That's great. That's when you want to bet them. Teams that cannot tackle in space get run over by Louisville completely. So keep your eye on that this year.
Yeah,
The other
offensive line
thing
should be strong too.
I'll notice is like Louisville's offensive line is really good. Okay, as far as run blocking, Syracuse lost everybody on the defensive line who played 250 plus snaps last year. Is that the opening game you want if you're Syracuse, like an offensive line from Louisville that's ready to roll and come hit you in the mouth? I don't think that it is. And I'm a little skeptical about some of these replacements the Cuse has along that defensive line. They're going to tell you they're going to be, undersized but fast penetrating. They better be, because they are really lacking bulk. If you look at their projected depth chart, do they have any 300-pounders up front, or even any guys who are 290? It's if you're just on the field watching them warm up, I think that would be something you would notice. Like, okay, this is kind of one of the more extreme speed defenses, not somebody that can withstand getting punched.
Yeah, and we talked about that before. I mean, I really like. The line just feels fishy, but I really like Louisville there too. I mean, the linebackers are strength on their defense. The secondary, they hit hard. They hit the portal hard to improve a secondary. It was really bad last year, but we don't. Does anyone really afraid of what Syracuse is going to do through the air this year? And you're right, that offensive line, which returns, I think, over 110 starts, brings in a new offensive coordinator who I think will improve the offensive line also. So yeah, I completely agree with you. How about someone you're selling in the ACC?
Yeah, so I have two that I've already bet the under on. And look, I don't like Georgia Tech either, but I feel like their number has gotten pretty damn low. Maybe there's still some room there. But I did play under on Syracuse at 5.5 minus 90, which is a steep price, but I felt like I don't see a whole lot of path for them to get to 6. Maybe I'll be wrong. The other team I'm fading pretty hard is Virginia. I'm not really sure that they have a whole lot of talent to make that defense improve a whole lot. And then here's the key. They lost all 5 offensive line starters off that team last year. And Virginia is a squad that has trouble taking transfers because a lot of people's credits are not going to transfer in to Virginia. And they took 2 this year. They took John Paul Flores from Dartmouth, and they took Mark Hollensteiner from Georgetown. Hollensteiner was a pretty decorated guy at Georgetown. Here's the problem. He's not on their roster, guys. He transferred back to Georgetown for quote unquote personal reasons. That offensive line is really, really young. And I just feel like they had a special mixture last year. I don't see this team winning 6 games. I have them like slightly under 6. So, for me, 7.5 minus 40 to the under is the play with UVA that I currently like at current odds in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, the hire by Tony Elliott to recognize that he needed a strong defensive coordinator to go out and get John Rodzinski from Air Force. That was a great hire, but I mean, it's not going to translate overnight because there are a lot of problems with this team when you look on both sides of the ball. And Brennan Armstrong is going to be running for his life. This is the same thing as Malik Cunningham, except he has a bit of an offensive line to protect him. There's no offensive line here whatsoever. Brennan Armstrong gets hurt. That's the entire Virginia offense. So, good luck to Tony Elliott in his first year. I think the defensive coordinator hire was great, but that's not going to change overnight. The only thing they have going for them is a pretty easy schedule, and it's a pretty easy start.
Yeah, could they start 7-0? Is if everything goes right, if you believe in Virginia, like that's before you get to the end of the season, like that you could look at that, and that's why you would be kind of cautious to go under. But yeah, I agree with you. They went 122 starts returned last year on the offensive line. FBS starts this year, it's 2 FBS starts on the offensive line. That's an enormous question. They also play. I think they play Coastal Carolina, right? Virginia.
They play Coastal.
I'm going to be fascinated to see like what can Armstrong do with all like a roster that like has so many questions, and the same thing with like McCall. Like if you like the Coastal Carolina has like 4 total returning starters too, and obviously lost a lot to the NFL. So yeah, the schedule is favorable, but you're right. I think that there's way more questions than answers outside of the quarterback position with a Virginia team that only won 6 games last year, and that includes a win against Miami, who missed like a 28-yard field goal to win the game. And they've gone 6-6 the last 2 years. 2 of those wins, their opponent missed a chip shot field goal to win. All right, good stuff. But I'll give you a shot to plug anything you want here. I appreciate you joining us. Where can people find you at?
Yeah, guys, just follow me on Twitter at BudElliott3. I do a little newsletter. Just email BudElliottCFB@gmail.com and check us out on the Cover 3 podcast 5 days a week during the season.
And actually, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Florida State. So I'll give you one sentence. Over, under, high, low on them. Wait and see. Thoughts on Norvell? Yeah, quick thoughts on FSU.
I think the number's good. Boosters I know there who had to cut the check to pay Willie Taggart are happy with Norvell making consistent progress. They think it was a dumpster fire. He took over, so they're going to be patient with him. Dion's not going to be the head coach in 2023.
Got cool. Your ticket in your back pocket for LSU in week 1, like I do, or?
I actually feel like the under is the shot there. Both defensive lines are going to have a lot of guys with their number called in the NFL draft, and both offensive lines I think should be better, but also a little questionable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think both defensive lines will control the line of scrimmage on each side. All right, good stuff, bud. And make sure you check him out on Twitter, Cover 3 Podcast, and his newsletter as well. We'll talk to you throughout the year. Good luck this season, and thanks for all your insight. All right, Colin, let's get into some of the teams. We'll touch on every team. Some of them we won't go that in-depth on, like Duke, because who cares? And some of them we'll just kind of sentence or two because we talked about them with Bud. So let's start. I guess I should say the odds to win the conference. Clemson, around minus 150 to win the ACC. Next up is Miami at plus 500. NC State around plus 800. Obviously, shop around for the best number. I just pulled these from one book right before this recording. Pitt 10-1, Wake 21-1, UNC 25-1, Louisville 30-1, Florida State 30-1, Virginia, BC around 50-1, as with Tech, and then you're in the dregs with Georgia Tech, Houston, and Duke. I think Duke's 1,000-1 to win the ACC. But let's start in the ACC Atlantic, where Clemson's around a minus 200, minus 220 favorite. NC State next at plus 425. The key here is that Clemson does host NC State, which will go a long way in determining who wins the division. And that's one of the reasons why Clemson is a favorite here. We'll start with Clemson win total over 10.5. We talked about them, right? New coordinators, quarterback battle, nasty defense, some questions on the offensive line. What will receiver look like? Should be improved. The tackle positions for Clemson are set, but there are a lot of movement. You know, they lost like 4 centers in the last 2 years, some to injury and retirement. When I look at Clemson's, we pull up Clemson's schedule. So Clemson's schedule, usually we're used to Clemson, of 2-3 years ago, they're double-digit favorites in every game, right? Well, this year I have them double-digit favorites in 7 games. That's it. That's low for the Clemson of a couple of years ago. And additionally, at BC is a tough spot, right? At BC comes after the NC State game and before at FSU. So I have them double-digit favorites at BC, but that's a tough spot. Same against Louisville, right? They played Louisville at home. That's after a trip to Notre Dame and before a game against Miami. So some tough spots in there on games that they're going to be at least a medium-sized favorite. I have them only favored by single digits in 5 games and/or a coin flip at Notre Dame, at Wake, NC State at home, Miami at home, and Florida State. So there's games that they could certainly drop, especially if the quarterback play doesn't improve. And, the coordinators, they've had coordinator continuity for so long. I project them at 9.8. So win total sitting at 10.5. I'm at like 9.75, 9.76, I think. I'd lead under here. And it's all eyes on the quarterback situation. What are your thoughts on the Clemson win total?
Yeah, I'm under with you. I project this at 10. So I'd say under 10.5. I went to ACC Media Days with the whole goal of getting in front of DJ Uiagalelei and seeing what I could take from the kid. 235 pounds. He ballooned up to 260 after the season last year, after the Cheez-It Bowl. He looked thin. He's got meal control. He's got his workouts. And I think while I took away the fact that he is in shape and he's ready to go this season, it's hard to deny that he listens to the whispers. He reads message boards and he hears voices when he has bad play. He's a good kid. He just takes it to heart. And I'm not sure I could bet a national championship on a player or a quarterback of a college football team that is listening to whispers and rumors and reading message boards. It's just, and he had a season last year, 9 TDs, 9 interceptions. He had a drop rate of 30%. His adjusted completion rate fell off the map below 50% when he had a pressured pocket. So whether that's weight related or that's mental related, footwork, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is one of the worst seasons for a quarterback on a team that's supposed to contend for the national championship. So we'll see if he can pick it up. When we look at the Cade Klubnik kid, 0.9951 was his recruiting rank, which is just, a couple 110ths below where Trevor Lawrence was the year before. Not really a knock on this kid. He looked good in spring. He made the right decisions. There was he had a couple of check downs on some crossing routes and slants. He did really well reading the defense. I think he only made really one bad pass the entire time. So he looked good, 15 of 23 in the spring game. And I think really, you talk about the coordinator swap. So DJ is going to swap out offensive coordinator Tony Elliott. We're going to come in with Brandon Streeter, and that's the quarterback coach. And, you have to ask, like, is Streeter going to be able to replicate what Tony Elliott did, what Jeff Scott did, what Chad Morris did? They were able to go through those seamless transitions, but they had Deshaun Watson, they had Trevor Lawrence, they had Kelly Bryant. So, we're going to find out what DJ is made of. And I think maybe we could be on to Klubnik pretty fast if he doesn't get it worked out. So all eyes on the quarterback position, an offensive line that should dominate. Jordan McFadden is back. They had better continuity as the year went on. 78% of the snaps from last year back. And they have a great running attack between Kobe Pace and Will Shipley. One of them is really good at missing tackles. One of them is really good at accumulating yards after contact. They're not Travis Etienne. I should point that out. I think we got babied by Travis Etienne forever. We talked about so many weapons from T. Higgins, Amari Rogers, Justin Ross. I think Travis Etienne is maybe an underrated player that we've ever seen in college football, because this offense has been literally broken ever since he left. So we'll look to see the efficiency. That should bring the tempo. And then on the defense, I don't know how much I should say, Stuck. I mean, Miles Murphy is going to be a household name as an edge rusher. Brian Barisi is going to be back from his torn ACL. He's climbing NFL boards at interior.
It's the best D-line in college football. Are they good enough? So, look, Clemson's really experienced. They don't have coordinator continuity, but usually they lose a ton of guys in the NFL. They didn't really lose much. They went from like one of the least experienced teams last season to now, top 40. They're not used to being there. They usually lose a lot in the NFL. Now, they don't bring anyone in the transfer portal, but they're much more experienced this year. They did still win 10 games last year, but they went 5-2 in one possession games. Easily could have only been like 7 wins. Quarterback play has to get better. But the question is on defense, how much they miss Venables, and then is the defensive line just so good? Because the one question on the defense is in the secondary. Is it so good that it doesn't even matter in the secondary? So those are my two main questions with the defense: Venables' impact, and then is the defensive line just so good that it doesn't really matter what they lost in the secondary?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. It's going to be quite interesting because the linebackers, have kind of depleted. The secondary is not as good as it was not experienced as it was last year. Is the defensive line good enough to get pressure on the quarterback, allowing 7 players to drop or 8 players to drop, however many they've got on the defensive line? But which matters in the ACC. I just mentioned it's 7. Look, there's 14 teams in the ACC, so that's what, 10% of all of FBS. And in the top 20 of NFL quarterback prospects for next year's draft, you could argue 7 are in this conference. That's 35% of the top 20. So there's very capable quarterbacks in this league. So that's what we're going to have to handicap with Clemson all year is, okay, you saw them go up against Sam Hartman and there was just so much pressure, just blew up everything that they wanted to do at the point of the mesh attack. And that's going to be the handicap here. It's like, okay, you're going up against all these quarterbacks, and look, they're good. How much can their defensive line just disrupt everything? Because they're certainly going to get tested. You look at NC State, right? And they got questions in the backfield, right? We'll get to them with Jordan Houston, but I mean, they lost 2 of their best running backs. So is there a rushing attack out there, or should teams just line up and start throwing on first down against this defensive line? So it's going to be really interesting to see how they're attacked, and if it's going to be at the linebacker level, if it's going to be at the secondary level, and testing Goodwin, whether or not he's able to adapt on the fly from teams that are running a lot of motion or doing things with screens or bubbles or whatever to try to confuse this defense, because Venables isn't there. So I think Goodwin's going to get tested real fast to see how caught up he is on actually calling a defense that can execute on demand within 3 seconds for Clemson this year. It's going to be a fascinating watch, but I'm under on this team. Klubnik, I really like what he did in the spring. He's got the pedigree. He ran track. So he's, in high school. So he's got some burner. He's got some legs on him. He can take off from the pocket. It's going to be completely different than what DJ brings to the table. So we'll see how Clemson season go. But for me, under 10.5.
Talked about NC State getting a lot of love preseason, especially from a guy with the initial CW with 2 L's in his name, in his first name. Win total sitting at over 8.5, like minus 160 or, it's around 9. Depends on where you look. This is a team that's getting a lot of love. And like I mentioned, they're the only team in the ACC that brings their entire staff back. There's, they get Devin Leary back at quarterback. Their entire staff is back, one of the most experienced defenses in the country. You could argue the best linebacking core in the country. There are questions at receiver. They lose their leading receiver. They lost 2 dynamite running backs. They lose their star left tackle to the NFL. A little worried about some of the pressure they can generate off the edge and havoc. So D end is a question for me. But the secondary is really experienced. Special teams, maybe a question. They lost a punter to the NFL and a stud kick returner, one of those 2 backs. They do have a good kicker, at least. And I look at their schedule, win total, like I said, sitting around, really juiced 8.5, 9. I have them double-digit favorites in 7 games. But that ECU game I've talked about, it's a tough spot. And so is the game against Cuse. They go to Cuse after Clemson and Florida State. And, we've seen it before, even with Clemson, like weird things can happen at Syracuse. So 2 of those games where they should be double-digit favorites, like right around 10, those are 2 tough spots in there. Then they have 4 true coin flips, right? Like at Louisville, not like right around a coin flip. At Louisville, at UNC to close out the year. They have Va-Tech at home. Florida State, they at least get at home. That game comes after Clemson. Maybe another tough spot. It's also worth mentioning the Cuse is off a bye in that tough spot. So there's losable games here. I project them at like 8-6-5. So I would if you could get I guess I would lean under, but I think the number's pretty right. They haven't won 10 games since 2002 when Phillip Rivers was there. They did get a number of special teams and defensive touchdowns last year. They're +6 turnover margin. Their defense should be nasty. But I'm worried about the passing offense. They were 91st in passing success rate. And now you lose a Mezzi. So the defense is going to be nasty to keep them in games, and you have a really reliable quarterback in Leary, but these are left tackle and all of your key skill possession players. But you love NC State. You're in on them to win the conference. Explain why.
I do. They have enough experience coming back on the offensive line. Last year, they were 13th in havoc allowed. I don't think Devin Leary is going to get touched. And when you talk about that, Devin Leary's numbers continue to take off. A ridiculous TD to INT rate that is backed up by being 31-9 in big-time throws to turnover-worthy plays. He was
35 touchdowns, 5 interceptions last year. So I mentioned their turnover margin. Well, it helps when you have a quarterback who is 30 more touchdowns than interceptions.
Leary ranks as the best quarterback in the nation in turnover-worthy play rate. You can call that offensive line. You can call that, bad defenses in the ACC. But that's just an amazing stat, and that shows you how accurate Leary was. And even when he had pressure in his face and pressure dropbacks last year, he still had 10 TDs to 2 INTs. So the kid's just, I think he's going to be able to go into Clemson just fine. If you can go into Mississippi State and you can listen to the cowbells ring all day, I think you're not going to have a problem with any kind of audible sound or anything from a decibel level when he goes down and plays against Clemson. Dave Doran believes in this team so much. They added just 1 player in the transfer portal. So the team is just loaded in every single unit, more than 77% back on both sides of the ball. And the big question, like I said, is the running back, where Jordan Houston, he has patiently waited for this team to get starter duties. In 2019, he was on fire. He had 26 missed tackles. He averaged 3.7 yards after contact. And then he just got buried in the depth charts by Bam Bam Knight and Ricky Person. So, it's Houston's time. We'll see what he can do. And there's guys behind him too. So from an experience perspective, it looks like they don't have any because, you look at last year's stats, but, Jordan Houston actually has been there before. And I'll say this, is it unfathomable that NC State can make the college football playoff? Wake Forest and Pitt were in this situation last year where we were still talking about them in November. Now, granted, Wake, we knew they had no shot, but at least they were in the discussion every Tuesday night when they released the rankings. When you flip over to the defense, I know Clemson's good. I know they have the best defensive line. I'm not arguing that, but this might be the best overall defense, and defensive coordinator Tony Gibson is probably the best in the game right now. This team was top 10 in success rate. Specifically, they were 3rd in standard down success rate, which means teams were not moving the ball and getting the chains going. The Wolfpack were 7th in the nation in keeping first downs from being posted. They don't allow anyone to get a first down. And that's really great for field position for your offense. They were top 30 in havoc, and now they get their linebacker, Drake Thomas, 2 shutdown corners back. The defense is just absolutely loaded. And when you question like Clemson, if NC State defense can stop a Will Shipley and a Kobe Pace in the run game, the Wolfpack finished 5th in the nation defensive stuff rate. They were in the gaps. No one was getting through the line of scrimmage. So there's a great chance they're tackling behind the line of scrimmage and beating Clemson again. They've already done it. There's no mental hurdle here with beating Clemson. They've already done it. This team is super focused and super pissed off that their bowl game was called off the day of. It's all they could talk about. The head coach looked mad at media days. The players looked mad. I couldn't get them to crack a smile. I went to Devin Leary. I went to Dave Doran. I couldn't get them to be happy about anything. They are so focused and upset that UCLA and the COVID issues, they didn't get to play their bowl game. Because if you remember, Rutgers got to go play a bowl game because they had 1 day notice, right? I mean, NC State would have loved to have anybody come in and fill that spot. So I'm sold on these guys more than anything. Obviously, the hedge spot is Clemson. Now, that number's come down from 14-1, I think 8-1 to win the ACC. And that's not good because you're going to have to spend your hedge money right there in that spot, because I think that's the only game where they're going to be in trouble. And that's the only team that can probably knock them out of the race to win the Atlantic and get you to take that ticket into the ACC championship game. But yes, NC State is the play, and there's only 1 game to hedge, and it's against Clemson. And it's going to be a pricey ticket to lay it on Clemson. But at the same time, I'm not hedging. I'm playing NC State all the way.
Yeah, I would just play the under in that game. I'm worried about do they have enough explosiveness in the passing attack? Like I'm not doubting Leary's ability, but just right. It was a passing attack that lacked explosiveness last year, and you lose your most explosive receiver and your explosive backs. Like you're going up against that Clemson defensive front. That's the game they're going to have to win to get to the ACC championship in all likelihood. All right, so no play for me on NC State. I think that game at ECU is going to set the tone for their season. And don't sleep on tripping up at Cuse if they end up beating Clemson. Then that Florida State game and then the at Cuse after gets a little bit trickier. All right, but let's finish up in the Atlantic. We talked about Florida State. I like what they're doing. I lean over here, but they have I think I project them at, if you can find like over 6.5 minus 140. I project them at like 7-3. Not enough to play it. There's a lot of coin flip games with the win totals in the ACC, so I have to really show value and really have a strong opinion. And as we talked to Bud, who knows Florida State really well, he says that's about right. That game against LSU week 1 will go a long way in determining that win total, I would imagine. Not an easy schedule. Collin, you are looking for Florida State, who went up against Chip Kelly and took them to overtime. Now Chip Kelly is at LSU, and also in week 1 will take on Florida State. You like Florida State in that game, +3?
I do. I took them at +7 when it opened way early back in March. I took them again at +3. I think you're going to play this through the pick. It's down to 2.5. I think it's going to go that way, and I wouldn't be surprised if Florida State is a favorite going in. And like Bud said, it should be, 2 massive mountain-sized defensive lines trying to control the game. But, this is the best returning numbers that Mike Norvell's had. They're returning 79% on offense and 95% on defense. Nearly all the receiving yards are coming back. All the defensive tackles are mostly coming back. The PBUs all return. The defense was really successful last year. And now Adam Fuller and Randy Shannon are going to try to reproduce top 30 ranks in success rate and rush explosiveness, tackling, finishing drives. The defense is there. And, I got to talk to Jamie Robinson at ACC Media Days. He's one of the best slot coverage defenders, and he has just an immaculate tackling grade, just 16 misses in his entire career dating back to South Carolina. And the pass rush, ended 43rd in the nation. Players like Robert Cooper in the interior, who's an elite run stopper, but he falls off a bit in the pass rush. So they've got to get more pressure on the quarterback. We'll see what they can do against the LSU offensive line. Kenny Dillingham has left as offensive coordinator. Some people would argue that that's not really that big of a loss, but bringing in Alex Atkins, who's been working with the offensive line for a couple of years, you can expect more Jordan Travis quarterback runs. I think we're in for more explosive plays, more highlights. The question with Travis is can you keep the chains moving? Can you have any kind of success rate, not just rely on the big play? 78% of the offensive line snaps come back, so that's a good thing. That's a good thing for continuity. And some of the portal assisted Norvell. He brought in +11 players gained, and Florida State was one of the more explosive teams on offense. So we'll see what they can do on passing downs. We'll see what they can do about getting first downs. The offensive line is still a work in progress. I mean, they were working from scratch about 3 years ago during the Taggart era. Last year, they finished 82nd stuff rate. That's got to improve. 114th in havoc allowed. Like we just talked with Bud about the LSU game, about the defensive lines controlling. FSU's offensive line was 114th in havoc allowed. That has got to get cleaned up, but 27th in explosive play rate. So that's what you get with Florida State. And, they get a warm up with Duquesne in week 0 before taking on LSU. So all eyes are going to be on that, see how the trench works out, as, the skill positions may get the day off. They may be pulled out after a few scores. I think the trench is going to be important watching that game. But, we'll see. So, yeah, definitely I like the Florida State over, but for them, I mean, my projection is around 7.5. But to get that over, you're going to have to beat LSU. So might as well just go ahead and call it good. Take my points with Florida State there in the first game. And if they don't win that game, they have a really tough shot at going over that win total.
Yeah, then right away you're at Louisville the next week. But they were much better with Jordan Travis last week. For reference, I project them 7.4 wins. So I would lean over. There's probably going to be opportunities just throughout the year. I mean, either at Ville and LSU, probably going to be decided in the first 3 weeks. I have them double-digit favorite in 5 games, underdog in 5 games. Never a big underdog, and then -7 in 2 other ones. Their defense doesn't replace 2 really good defensive ends, but they're loaded up front. They did rank top 10 in red zone D last year, and they forced 20 takeaways. So we'll see if they can repeat some of the good things we saw from the defense. But I think they're heading in the right direction. They brought in some good transfers on the offensive line, and I think that unit, which has been just a nightmare for Florida State, 4 straight losing seasons for Florida State. I can't believe I'm saying that in my lifetime, but I think the offensive line is finally headed in the right direction. That's been a major part of their downfall over the past 4 seasons. Elsewhere in the ACC Atlantic, we talked about Ville. I think we lean over, but there's going to be opportunities just to bet them on a game-to-game basis. Cuse lean under there. I don't think the offensive coordinator is a fit, and I think that team has way more questions than answers. The 2 teams that are left, Wake Forest and BC. Wake Forest, obviously, they both have NFL prospects at quarterback. Wake Forest with Sam Hartman back, BC with Phil Jerkovich. Wake Forest sitting at over 8.5 wins plus 110, BC over 6.5 plus 120. Any feel on either of those? I'll tell you just my quick thoughts are that I don't know how much Phil Jerkovich I think their new offense coordinator will help. And I don't know how much Phil Jerkovich's injury last year impacted his performance. And then I trust Hafley to eventually fix the D. There are questions on that defense, but I really trusted him. So it's probably a pass for me. And then same with Wake. I project Wake. I show a little bit of value on the under with Wake, but I like the defensive coordinator hire in Lambert. And I have just so much respect for Hartman. And then Clausen usually just finds way to overperform my projections. So lean under there. So those are both passes for me. I think you'd like the under in both, right?
Yeah, under in both, bet them both. So Boston College under 6.5 projected at 4.8. Jeff McNulty is the new offensive coordinator. If that name doesn't ring familiar, he was the offensive coordinator at Rutgers in 2019. He had a 57% rush rate as a coordinator, and he ran a lot of 11. So the question is, he's going to run play action a lot. He loves play action. So will the running backs, Pat Garwo and Alex Singfield, running back, are they going to be able to fool defenses enough to give Phil Jerkovic enough time to run that play action? The defense is getting better. You can see Jeff Hafley's stamp coming on the team, 6th in tackling, 17th in defensive finishing drives. The problem, they can't produce a pass rush. They can't generate any havoc. And speaking of Phil Jerkovic, last year he only had 50% of his grip when he came back from an injury. So they're going to have to deal with that. They only had 4 portal players taken, but wide receiver Zay Flowers does return, and he was 18th in the nation in average depth of target. So I think it's just going to be more of the same, and I don't think the more of the same means that team is 7 wins. The offensive line returns less than 50% of their snaps from last season, and they were 113th in pressure allowed. So I can't get over the hump with Boston College when you return half your offensive line, and last year's offensive line was 113th in pressure allowed. So I'm out. Plenty of shutdown, front sevens on this schedule to shut down the rushing attack. Clemson, Notre Dame, FSU, NC State. I don't like BC's chances of getting anything going against those teams. So I'm going to take the under there. And then real quick on Wake Forest, there's going to be a pullback on this offense. And Jaquari Roberson did so much with his 112 targets. He's out of there. And now A.T. Perry is back. And I'm telling you, the highlights that you can pull up on YouTube and Twitter of A.T. Perry, they're fantastic. But what people don't realize is he ranked 133rd last year and 11% of his targets being dropped. That's a lot of drops for a guy that's about to take on number 1 duties on every down, and not just as like the guy that Hartman's looking for on 3rd down. Can't say anything bad about Sam Hartman, a 2-to-1 ratio and big time throws versus turnover worthy plays. But his uncatchable pass rate, dipped to 39th of all quarterbacks in the Power 5. And that was a little bit shocking to me. So he has the deepest average depth of target in the nation. So maybe that plays a little bit of the factor into it. And you're right, Brad Lambert is a great defensive coordinator. He was at Charlotte for a number of years. His defense is always ranked high in Havoc, top 40 in Havoc. He goes to Purdue, who only had one guy on the defensive line that we've loved to back the last couple of years. He changes the whole look of that defense. 35th in finishing drives and Havoc. And before that, they were outside the top 75. So I do believe Brad Lambert can do better here, but this is not going to be as flashy of an offense as we're used to. And after watching what Army did on offense last year and some of these other teams on offense, Brad Lambert's got his work cut out on defense. So I think 8 is the more proper number, and under 8.5 on Wake Forest is the way to go.
All right, let's move on to the ACC Coastal Division. Miami has done a plus 110 favorite to win the division. Pitt plus 285. UVA plus 575, UNC plus 650, Va Tech plus 850, then Georgia Tech, who cares, 33-1. I don't even know where Duke is. Duke, by the way, who cares? We're not going to talk about a new coach, quarterback battle. I think we can get like under 3.5 minus 180. In order to go over, probably going to have to win at Kansas. It's probably the game it comes down to. They have some winnable non-conference games, but we're not talking about Duke football here. We already spent too much time talking about Kansas the other day. So I'll tell you I'm all in on Miami to win. I have them to win the division. So I think you're going to try to sell me on Pitt. I hate Pitt this year. I have Pitt under 8.5. I also found Miami plus 160 to win the division. It's down to plus 110. Ideally, you could try to find at some books, plus 130 or better. But I have Pitt under 8.5 minus 110, and I have Miami to win the division. I just can't figure out what Clemson's going to be, and I would rather just go with the head-to-head because I'm lower on Pitt. I hate the offensive coordinator hire. I think they're just going to turn in back into Narduzzi, just boring, and they're going to be in a lot more closer games than they might anticipate with their style, and they're going to be in lower scoring games. And by the way, they go to Miami, which will probably go a long way in deciding the division in the regular season finale. I love Miami. I love Van Dyke. I think the offense will be great. The offensive line is improving. You can bring in Cristobal there. You can expect an offensive line bump. The offense I think they averaged 37 points in the 9 games that Van Dyke started last year. That wasn't the issue. They also got extremely unlucky in close games last year. Easily could have won 10 games. So I think that the coaching hire, Cristobal coming in, Steele at defensive coordinator, I think is going to do wonders because, look, the problem last year, what was the problem? Discipline on defense, right? Tackling, penalties, those are fixable things quickly, right? It's not a lack of talent. So I think you can expect a bump on the defensive end. So I don't like anything that Pitt is doing. Their defense should be solid as always, especially up front. But you lose Pickett, you lose Addison, which is just a huge loss. And I think that the losing Whipple is going to hurt. And I think that they're going to get a lot less efficient on offense. So I'm all in on Miami to win the division at plus money, and Pitt under 8.5 wins. If you look at their schedule, I think it really comes down to, can they go 500 against like at Louisville, at UNC, at Miami, at Virginia, home against Tennessee and Va Tech? I will bet that they do not. And that's assuming they take care of business in their other 6 games. And like I said, I could see them drop in a game, a Narduzzi classic, when they're just going to get extremely run happy. And this pass offense, I think, is going to take a big step back. So I'm not a big Slovis guy. So that's who I like to win the division. And my favorite win total is Pitt under, in addition to Georgia Tech under. I'll keep it brief with Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech under 3.5 minus 110. I think it's a little more juice now. It's what I bet. By the way, actionnetwork.com and Action Network app, I'll have details for all of my win totals. This team was decimated by the portal. They only returned 6 total starters. That's the lowest in the ACC. I am not buying what Jeff Collins is selling. I wanted to buy it. And it was going to be a tough task transitioning from the triple option. Had a pandemic thrown in there.
And he loves the Waffle House, right? We love him because he loves the Waffle House.
Yeah. But I've not been impressed with the in-game decisions. Everything should be a mess. They lose Gibbs to Alabama too, which is just a massive loss. Defense only returns 2 starters. They're transitioning to a 4-man front. lose 3 starters in the secondary. It's massive roster turnover. I think Collins might not make it through the year. You have schematic changes on both ends. They bring in an new offensive coordinator, Chip Long, who I hate. He was awful at Tulane last year. I don't like anything about this team. Then you look at their schedule, arguably the hardest in the nation. They have 3 winnable games at home, in my opinion. That's it. Their win total is 3.5. That's it. Against Virginia, Duke, and the Western Carolina. Keep in mind, this is a Georgia Tech team that lost to Stanford, a triple option, and Citadel, triple option. A Citadel team still runs a triple option at home in the Collins era. But Duke, can they beat Duke, Virginia, and Western Carolina at home to get to 3 wins? I don't know. Maybe. They'll probably beat Duke and Western Carolina. I have them as a dog against Virginia. But if they could sweep those to get to 3, they got to get 1 more to go over. Clemson, they're 3 touchdown underdogs in Atlanta. Ole Miss, at UCF, at Pitt, at Florida State, at Va Tech, Miami, at UNC, at Georgia. Where's the win? So I'll pay to make them beat Virginia, win the other 2 winnable games, and then find an upset in one of those games. I have them a double-digit underdog in all 9 of those games. So I went under 3.5. I think this could be a disaster for Georgia Tech, and they might be starting over again. So ACC Coastal for me is where all my favorite bets are in the ACC. Pitt under 8.5 wins, Georgia Tech under 3.5, and then Miami to win the Coastal. We'll get to UNC and Va Tech, but I'll let you. Let's start with Pitt. You bet Pitt to win the ACC. Let me get your thoughts on the Fighting Narduzzi's.
Yeah, I love Pitt to win the ACC. I know I said the NC State, but that is my pick to be the championship game here is NC State versus Pitt. The loss of Whipple is interesting. It depends on the way you look at it, right? They were running an extremely high tempo with Kenny Pickett last year, something that Pat Narduzzi is not comfortable with whatsoever. It worked. You have to keep letting Whipple go when he's got an offense that's working. So keep your eyes on Nebraska, where Scott Frost is getting up in front of the media every day this week and saying, Whips is in control. Whips is in control. And I feel like a lot of that was going on out of Pitt last year. Well, Whipple moves on. He's able to go and pick out his own coordinator, and he immediately targets Frank Cignetti over at Boston College, coming in there for Phil Dracovic after a number of years where Cignetti was in the NFL as a quarterbacks coach, and he specifically wanted him to come in and work with Slovis. But I think the writing is on the wall, or at least it was said a billion times at ACC Media Days. We are going to be a very slow, bruising, rushing offense. There is no plans for Slovis to be airing this thing out on 1st and 2nd down. I think it's going to be a completely different scheme from him. According to Narduzzi, he's picking it up, and Slovis is going to be just fine in this offense, especially because he's not going to be dependent on to save them all the time.
He's picking up what? Handing the ball off? I mean, I hope he can hand the ball off.
Well, there comes a play action pass once you can establish a little bit of a ground game. But the junior recorded 54 touchdowns and 21 interceptions as a Trojan. He deflated last year. He had a nearly even distribution of big-time throws and turnover-worthy plays. But then again, USC was a bit of a mess last year, so you maybe give a pass on that. But there's no doubt they're going to be handing off the ball, and Pitt returns 3 running backs with 100 rushing attempts from last season. Israel Abanikanda, Vincent Davis, Rodney Hammond, they're all going to run behind an offensive line that returns every starter. I mean, Pitt, I have to get into how great this defense is going to be. It's a Narduzzi defense. They are going to swarm. They are going to, hit every single advanced 5.
Yeah, they'll tackles for loss. Their defensive line has 2 pros on it. Yeah, their defense is going to be good. They'll give up big plays. They play aggressive quarters defense on the outside. Yeah, their defense is going to be good, but they're going to be playing like 20 to 17 games every week.
Right. They are. And I trust that this defense is going to be able to do what they always do. Like, you usually can't count on havoc to turn into scores, but Pitt has a way of doing it. Servassier Dennis, I know, is going to be named to our All-American team coming up here, the Action Network All-American team that we're going to put out. And there's no drop off to this Pitt defense whatsoever. And it was good enough to get them there last year. A big difference between you and me, and I'll pivot into Miami. Pitt doesn't play Clemson, and Miami does. So, that is certainly one thing to take into account when you look at strength of schedule, what these 2 teams have to go up with. And that is something that Pitt has, a clear example of. Like, Pitt's average strength of SP plus defenses is 70th, as to where Miami's is 59. So, there's definitely a tougher slate here for Miami to get through than there is for Pitt. Miami, there's just things I'm not comfortable with. I don't feel as if Cristobal likes his two guards and his center. Tyler Van Dyke told me, I asked him, I said, what do you see out of this offense? It's going to be different than last year. He said that Cristobal is going to use a lot of pulling guards, a pulling center, and they're undersized and they're not, what he wants on the offensive line. The tackles are fine. The tackles are exactly fit the Cristobal mold, but it sounds like instead of, all 5 offensive lines sitting there and defending Tyler Van Dyke, there's going to be a lot of shifting the pocket. There's going to be a lot of pulls here. And that, I don't think if Bethune-Cookman gets one pressure on Miami in the first week, that'll be shocking. Watch for Southern Miss, but then I would not back Miami against Texas A&M whatsoever. So keep your eyes on the interior part of the Miami offensive line. And then the defense, Kevin Steele, he has really, really got his work cut out for him here. We're talking about, a team that struggled with everything from tackling to finishing drives. Miami was just completely fell off a map under the Manny Diaz era. They trashed the turnover chain as Brett, was able to crack the news on that. And it looks like Mario Cristobal is ready to turn a page, but I'm not sure this is the team that he wants. But the good news is the season ends with Pitt and Miami. We can settle it then. You and I'll have some turkey, and then we'll settle our beef on who's gonna win this Coastal here.
Pitt doesn't have Clemson, but even if Miami loses to Clemson and they're end up being tied, it will come down to that game at Miami, who I have over a touchdown favorite in that game. And Pitt also has to go to Ville and to UNC back-to-back weeks, both teams off of a bye. That's not going to be an easy stretch. They do have a lot. All their winnable games are at home, which is what I don't like about a win total. And look, Pitt last year, I also think that the loss of Brennan Marion is big, but their wide receiver coach is now the passing game coordinator at Texas. But keep in mind that before last year with Whipple, they finally were throwing the ball with a quarterback who got drafted in the first round, with the Blitnikoff winner who now is gone. That was the first time they won more than 8 games in 11 years. So I think that you're going to see a couple Pitt head-scratching losses, AKA to Western Michigan at home last year.
And Narduzzi's able to upset a top 5 team every time he's able to lose to a MAC team. So
yeah, well, they don't play Clemson, so that's a win off the board. And then I just wouldn't worry about to as a rebuttal for you, because we're kind of in agreement with the ACC Atlantic, but
yeah,
I not with the Coastal. I mean, Miami, I just not worried about a Cristobal offensive line, and then Kevin Steele especially is a linebacker unit, and that's where Miami really struggled last year. And that and discipline and defense, I think just the more serious nature of the staff and Steele's expertise at the linebacker position, there's just too much talent for it not to improve. Did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, there's one other team in the Coastal I want to talk about, and that is that my numbers are so much higher on Virginia Tech than everybody else. So I double and triple checked my numbers on Virginia Tech to figure out what's going on here. I'm a full game and a half higher than what the market is at, and nobody has any love for Virginia Tech. I went to ACC Media Days. I think I shook everybody's hand instead of introducing myself. I just asked everybody what they think of Virginia Tech. I'm going back to how I build a PR. This team caught +7 points for me for TARP. 80% of the defense numbers come back from PBU, tackles, and pressures. The offense is considered to have 100% of its passing yards back because quarterback Grant Wells transfers in from Marshall. So that's how they got a 7-point bump there. Second order win total was neutral. I even docked Virginia Tech a couple points for the new coaching regime coming in, even though I like Brent Pry. His offensive coordinator, Tyler Bowen, was a co-coordinator and tight end coach at Penn State, so they know each other from there. Essentially, that whole staff was wiped out when Franklin tapped Mike Yurcich to come in and call the offense at Penn State. But, I'm looking at the power ratings. I make Virginia Tech +27 against Alabama in a hypothetical game. That sounds right. I make Virginia Tech +15 against Clemson in a hypothetical game. So my PR is right. And this flat out just comes out to strength of schedule. This is the second easiest schedule in the ACC when it comes to average SP plus defenses. Old Dominion, Wofford, Liberty, and then West Virginia, Transfer City. We'll see what they got in the back end is in their non-con. You look at Clemson, Ville, Florida State from the Atlantic. The ACC schedule starts with BC and North Carolina. Those are not defensive fronts that I'm scared of. It's not a murderer's row of defenses. Really, the only teams I think that they're absolutely going to get plowed by is Clemson, Louisville, and Florida State. Everything else, Grant Wells should be fine. He's got to work on his turnover-worthy play rate, but they return their top 4 tacklers on the defense. 77% of the pressures they recorded last year are back. Brent Pry is a great defensive coordinator. So I don't understand it. My power rating's right. I got a spreadsheet that does some calculations on the win total, and it's way above where the market is. I just don't get it. So I'm taking the over on these guys. I'm going to trust my numbers, but I have no friends in this room that I'm standing in.
Yeah, I can agree with you here. I mean, look, I have some questions on the offensive line. They did bring in a good offensive line coach. It's another defensive change. I mean, it's their third DC in the last 4 years. They're moving to like a more 4-3 traditional look. So we'll see what that happens. I also haven't got I think the number's about right personally. And they have an easy first 4 games and an easy last 4. I mean, they close at Georgia Tech, at Duke, at Liberty, and then home against UVA. They start with at ODU, BC at home, Wofford at home, West Virginia at home. I mean, they technically could go 8-0 in those games. Can they get to 6-2 in those 8? If they do, then they're going to go over. So it's all about the start. I mean, the middle is tough. They go at UNC, at Pitt, Miami at home, at NC State.
Right.
But yeah, the start and the close, that's why I'm staying. I wouldn't bet the under because of the schedule. But there's a lot of change. I don't even know if Wells is going to win the position. I'm not a Grant Wells guy either. I mean, he lost the script last year again with Marshall. And I don't know what happened because he had potential, and maybe Jason Brown wins a job. There's technically a quarterback competition, but I need to see something from Wells before I would go over. But the schedule's certainly conducive to going over. I do have to mention the special teams since I haven't talked about them enough this episode. They were a top 10 special teams unit last year, but they lose their kicker, long snapper, and first team ACC punt returner. They do have a great punter. These are only returning an all ACC player. But you're buying what Brent Pry is selling. But you're selling what Mac Brown is selling?
Yeah, I'm selling Mac Brown all the way. And I hate to do it. A lot of people love him in the coaching industry. I know our friend sources, the former TV camera mates there on ESPN. I know, I've seen Mac Brown in action now, live up close and in person. I understand why everybody likes him. I just don't agree with some of these moves, especially on defense. Listen, when I have to do a Google search with multiple tabs to figure out who the damn defensive coordinator is between Charlton Warren coming in from Indiana, Tommy Thigpen getting an internal promotion. Oh, hey, Gene Chizik, he's going to join. I have no clue who's calling plays. I must have spent 30 minutes trying to figure out who's going to call the plays here. But, it seems like Jay Bateman was the hot defensive coordinator when he got to come in. He has one bad year, and then he's out the door. So I wasn't really comfortable with that. And then Josh Downs, he is one of the best playmakers in all of college football. 3 yards per route run, close as what he had posted last year. If you don't know what yards per route run is, it's how explosive are you when you are targeted, and anything over 2 is considered really good. Josh Downs, one of the best in the nation by far, but we do have a quarterback battle. I think that we've been depleted a lot on some of the weapons that we have, especially in the backfield. And this is not an easy non-conference slate. I know people are going to look at this and say, oh, it's the Sun Belt. It's fine. It's not just the Sun Belt. App State was circled for me in week 1, but odds makers opened that thing at 3 down to 2.5. I mean, there's some love in the market for App State. And then after that trip to Boone, North Carolina keeps the Sun Belt World Tour going. They're going to go on and play Georgia State. And I know the numbers say that number is going to be 8.5, but Georgia State is stout. They're really good. So, these are the games that North Carolina has to win to get over this win total. So I'm under 7.5 all the way. I've got it projected like around 7, I think, but no, I am not on the North Carolina bus whatsoever.
I project right at 7.48. So it's over 7.5 plus 100. So nope, nothing for me. I do think that, part of me is saying going into it, I was like, is this the time to buy North Carolina? I mean, look, their recruiting classes have been so good. They went from a top 5 team preseason, top 10 last year to under 500. So are they now bottoming out the market? But I'd make it right around 7.5. They could start 5-0. That's the key. It's going to be their non-conference games, as you said. They're tough. Georgia State's one of the most experienced teams in the country. App State's a true coin flip. And then home against Notre Dame, where they'll be probably a small dog. So yeah,
easy wins. Stuck, you're looking at the schedule. Other than Duke, Georgia Tech, and Florida A&M, to point out the wins to me, it's really hard to find an extra. What do you need? 5 more after that. Find 5 more after that.
Yeah, I have them as a dog or a coin flip in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games, and then that's not even including at Georgia State. But I do think that this defense might be the most improved in the nation. Doesn't mean they're going to be great, but last year they were 110th. Literally, they're 106 EPA per rush, 120th in pass D, So they have like NFL talent. They're switching to a 3-man front. They have NFL talent in the secondary. Grimes and Duck at corner. I like, I like some of their linebackers, and I think just being more organized on the defensive end. We'll see if it translates. But the reason I bring it up, there's a quarterback battle. We'll see if they're going to be like what kind of offense they're going to be. But they could be a sneaky under team early on in the season. All right, great stuff, Collin, from you and Bud, and hopefully from myself. Before we get out of here, let's just sum up. One or two of your favorite win totals. If you want to list a couple more, you can. And then your pick to win the ACC. I'm going to say my favorite win totals, Georgia Tech under 3.5. I'll make them pull off an upset and win the 3 games they should. Just a mess. Still just not buying what Collins is selling. They've crushed the transfer portal. I'm also going Pitt under 8.5. I think the offensive coordinator and offensive talent departing will catch up to Pitt this year. And then Miami to win their division. Try to find plus 130 or better. I think the coaching changes are going to pay dividends this year, both on the offensive line and linebacker, two of the weakest areas. Defense should tackle better, more discipline, which is what this Miami team need. And the offense was just electric with Van Dyke. Just needed a little help in close games, positive regression candidate, defense, which I think will improve as well as the offensive line. So those are the 3 that I'll mention in my pick to win the ACC. I guess I'll have to say it's Miami. What do you got?
Yeah, so I have as many bets to win the ACC as I do win totals. So let's start with win totals. I like over 6.5 on Virginia Tech. No matter any way I can split this mathematically, I come out a game and a half over this 6.5 number that's on the market right now. The power rating is there. It's just this strength of schedule is so low. Now, remember, when you take win totals, you generally want to back a team that maybe has a first-year coach that's trying to reach a bowl game. That would be a huge improvement for this Virginia Tech team. It'd be a good start to the Brent Pry. And like Stuckey said, if you look at their first 4 games, their last 4 games, they could go 8-0 in those games. 6-2 is pretty much projected. They just need one other there. So I like over on Virginia Tech. I think they're being heavily overlooked, and they have such an easy schedule. I'm splitting up a unit bet on NC State to win the ACC. I'm splitting up a unit bet on another unit bet on Pitt to win it. I know Pitt goes down to Miami to end the season, but there is an easier schedule for Pitt here because they don't have Clemson like Miami does. I think there's problems with Miami in the trench. I have zero doubts about what's going on with Pitt in the trench. I know it's a complete tempo change. If you haven't seen that number come down against West Virginia in the backyard brawl, there's going to be a lot of Pitt unders this year. So I think it's gone from 54.5 down to 52. I would go and get that under in week 1, but I do love Pitt. They're going to try to grind you and beat the hell out of you in the trench. And I don't think Miami's ready to get into that battle yet. And maybe they will be by the end of the season, but it's still not the offensive line that Mario Cristobal wants. Next year, maybe. Next year, yeah, we'll talk about winning the ACC. So NC State, there's nothing I can say. If you've been living on an island, that was the first bet that I made of the 2022 season. They are loaded at every single unit on both sides of the ball. What Devin Leary is doing from the quarterback position has been just absolutely immaculate, especially when it comes to turnover worthy play rate. And this team is focused and hot after getting their bowl game cut last season. They had a chance to be a part of the college football playoff chatter in November, and just a couple of turnovers and a really narrow loss to Miami really kind of cut all that out. So NC State to win the ACC. I think they'll definitely win the Atlantic. Pitt to win the Coastal. They'll face each other in the ACC championship game. I'll sit back, crack a beverage, and not have to worry about hedging either ticket.
All right, there you have it. We'll see if NC State can deal with the expectations. I've said it before. They remind me of Iowa State. So are they mad or are they nervous? We're going to find out a lot.
Did you put your East Carolina ticket in yet? Did you get your East Carolina ticket in yet?
Yes, sir. Should have followed on the app this weekend. I put it in on Saturday, plus 10.5. It's gonna be a 4-point game with a minute to go. I talk about that game so much. NC State, NC State's either losing that game or winning by 38. All right, that'll do it for us. We will be recording tomorrow the Big Ten, 2 parts of the SEC. We're in full effect, baby. Week 0 will be here before we know. Got the Pac-12 to come to. Then our recap will go over all of our favorite preseason bets. Leave some reviews, 5-star reviews. We're doing a ton of giveaways. We'll give away pro subs and gear and all that. I'll read through them here shortly. But just Big Bets on Campus. Wherever you listen to the podcast, leave a review. Subscribe, unsubscribe, subscribe, tell a friend, tell an enemy. This is the time to help us out in the rankings with reviews. Now that we're cranking out episodes, I'm excited. Hope you're excited. It's time for us to go get back to work. We'll catch y'all later. Cheers.
Peace out.